There is something strange about this story, because at first glance, it feels like history doing what history always does. A name, a record, a line in a book that most people scroll past without thinking twice. But the more you sit with it, the more it starts to feel like something was missing, like a thread that should have been visible, but somehow wasn't. And at the center of it is a woman named Kate Warne. Someone who stepped into a world that wasn't built for her at all, and somehow ended up staying right next to the moments that could have changed everything. You tuned into Haunted Wavelength. My name is Darks, and tonight I will be your guide. Here we don't just tell stories, we step inside them. Before we begin, draw the curtains, dim the lights, settle in, and let me take you there. We're in Chicago, 1856. The city is loud in that early industrial way, half opportunity, half chaos. Everything feels like it's still being built, including the rules. Inside a small office, Allan Pinkerton is sitting behind a desk, running something almost unheard of at the time. A private detective agency. It is still new, still forming, still slightly uncertain about what it even is. He places an ad looking for detectives. And in his mind, that means one thing: man. That's just the words he's working in. So when the door opens one day and the woman walks in, nothing about it fits the expectation. She's young, recently widowed, new to the city, and she asks for work. At first, nothing unusual. Pinkerton assumes she's here for clerical work, something safe, something conventional. So he tells her they are not hiring for that kind of position. And that's when she stops him. Because that's not what she came for. She tells him she wants to be a detective. And for a moment, the room just holds. Because in 1856, that idea doesn't just feel unusual, it feels impossible. Pinkerton says it out loud. This isn't something women do. But Kate doesn't react the way people usually do when they are dismissed. She doesn't step back, she explains. A woman can move through places. Man can't enter without suspicion. She can hear conversations without being noticed. She can sit in rooms where people forget she's even there. And she doesn't frame it like permission. She frames it like capability. And something about that shifts the air in the room, because now it's no longer a question of can this be done? It becomes a question of what he's been missing. And later that day, the decision is made. She stays. At first, nothing about her work looks dramatic. There's no visible breakthrough, no confrontation, no moment that announces itself as important. She just starts working, quietly, watching how people behave when they think they're safe. Because that's where the truth usually slips out. Not under pressure, but under comfort. And Kate understands that instinctively. She changes how she speaks depending on where she is, adjusts her tone, her posture, even the way she exists in a room. And people respond exactly the way they always do when they don't feel threatened. They talk freely, openly, without thinking too much about what they are revealing. And she listens, not casually, not passively, but with intention. Because she isn't just hearing conversation, she's collecting patterns. One of her earliest major cases starts with a theft. A man suspected of stealing a large amount of money from the Adams Express Company. But there's nothing solid to hold on to. No clear evidence, no direct proof. Nothing that can move the case forward. So instead of following him directly, Kate changes direction completely. She gets close to his wife, At first, it's just conversation, social interactions, nothing that would raise suspicion. But over time, things start to shift. People begin to relax around her, and when people relax, details start to appear that were never meant to be shared. Small inconsistencies, offhand comments, moments that don't quite line up. And slowly, the shape of the truth starts forming underneath everything else, until eventually it breaks through. A confession follows, and the case that had no clear direction suddenly resolves itself. And from that moment on, she's no longer an experiment, she's a working part of the system. By 1860, everything inside Pinkerton's agency is growing. More cases, more research, more pressure. And Kate's role changes with it. Because what she's doing isn't isolated anymore. It's repeatable. So Pinkerton does something unusual, something unheard of. He builds a female detective bureau and places Kate in charge. At the time, this isn't just rare, it's almost unthinkable, but it works. Because the same pattern repeats itself again and again. They go unnoticed, they hear things others miss, they move through spaces without resistance, and that invisibility becomes their advantage. But outside the agency, something much larger is breaking apart. The United States is starting to fracture. Arguments over slavery, power, identity, and the future of the country itself. Everything is tightening, and at the center of it all is a man called Abraham Lincoln, who was not the president just yet, but about to become one. And that makes him a target in ways most people aren't willing to fully acknowledge it yet. Rumors start spreading, then reports, then something more structured, a possible threat in Baltimore. At first it sounds like just another political warning. Those weren't uncommon at the time, but this one doesn't fade the same way others do. It keeps coming back. More specific, more detailed, more coordinated. And when it reaches a railroad executive named Samuel Felton, he decides not to let it pass. He contacts Pinkerton, and suddenly Kate Warne is pulled into something that doesn't feel like a case anymore. It feels like a turning point. Baltimore sits in a dangerous position at this time, not just geographically but politically. A divided city, a tense city, a place where everything feels like it could tip at any moment, and Lincoln has to pass through it. There's no way around it. Because of the rail system, he can't travel straight through. He has to stop, transfer trains in public, in open space, in a moment where he is completely exposed. And somewhere in that exposure, the risk exists. So Kate disappears into a different identity. Not physically gone, but socially rewritten. A southern woman, calm, familiar, unremarkable in exactly the right way. She moves into gatherings where the tension is already building, and no one questions her presence because she fits the environment perfectly, and that's exactly why it works. At first, everything sounds like political frustration, strong opinions, heated voices, conversation that feel familiar for the time. But Kate isn't listening for emotion. She's listening to repetition. And repetition always means structure is forming. And slowly, it starts appearing. The same ideas, the same timing, the same location mentioned again and again, until it stops sounding like discussion and starts sounding like planning, a coordinated idea forming in fragments across different conversations. And once you hear it that way, you can't unhear it. What she pieces together is simple. Lincoln will pass through Baltimore, he will transfer between stations, and in that short movement between spaces, he will be exposed. The plan forms around that moment, a distraction, something loud enough to pull attention away from the station, and in that gap, movement, fast, close, coordinated. In a crowded, unstable environment like that, even a small opening is enough. And stopping it would depend entirely on timing. So Kate brings it back to Pinkerton, and everything changes in tone immediately. Because now it is no longer theory, it's structure, and structure means it can happen. So, naturally, Lincoln hears the warning, and at first he doesn't fully accept it, not because he ignores it, but because of what it would mean to act on it. To move differently, quietly, without public presence, that changes how he is seen, and that matters more than people like to admit. But as more information arrives, the pattern stops being ignorable, and eventually the decision shifts, and he agrees. The plan will change. Lincoln doesn't travel in public anymore. Instead, he moves through Baltimore at night, quietly and carefully and out of sight, disguised as a regular passenger, and Kate is there. Now inside the train, everything feels controlled in a way that almost feels unnatural. No noise, no movement beyond what is necessary, and Kate stays alert the entire time, because the entire situation depends on something very simple: not being seen. And around 3:30 in the morning, they pass through Baltimore. Nothing happens. No interruption, no reaction, no awareness. Just movement through a city that never realizes what just happened through it. And by morning, Lincoln is in Washington, safe. Now, the strangest thing is, that should have been the moment Kate Warne became famous. A woman helping uncover a possible assassination plot against the future president of the United States should have turned her into a household name. But that's not what happens. And this is actually one of the frustrating parts of Kate Warne's story, because the country is already moving towards something much larger. Just weeks later, the Civil War begins, and suddenly, America changes completely. Everything becomes uncertain. Suspicion, divided loyalties, rumors about spies, informants, sabotage. Entire cities start feeling unstable in ways they hadn't before. And inside that atmosphere, the kind of work Kate Warne was good at suddenly becomes incredibly valuable. She continues working with Pinkerton throughout the war, moving through Confederate-friendly social circles, gathering information, listening to conversations people never thought twice about having in front of her. The historical record around her becomes way thinner and more fragmented afterward. And honestly, that's probably because successful intelligence work tends to leave less visible evidence behind. And that's the part that feels almost strange in hindsight. The thing that made her effective was never force, it was invisibility. People underestimated her so completely that they often never realized they were being observed at all. While generals and politicians became the public faces of the war, people like Kate operated underneath it, quietly feeding information into a system that was still beginning to understand what intelligence work even was. And the deeper she moved into that world, the harder it became to clearly trace her afterward. Because espionage rarely leaves behind clean records, especially in the 1860s. A lot of what we know about her comes from fragments, mentions in Pinkerton's writings, reports from the period, small references tied to much larger events. It's almost like history kept recording the outcomes she influenced, while slowly losing sight of her standing beside them. But the people who worked with her understood exactly who she was. Pinkerton himself considered her one of his best operatives, not a symbol, not as the woman detective, but as someone genuinely exceptional at her work. And maybe the most telling detail comes at the very end of her life. In 1868, Kate Warne dies suddenly from pneumonia. She's only in her 30s. And afterward, Allan Pinkerton has her buried in his own family plot in Chicago, which says more than any public recognition ever could, because for someone working in a profession that was never designed for her, she had become impossible to separate from the institution itself. And like most of her work, the impact isn't visible in the moment, because it wasn't designed to be. It was designed to prevent outcomes that would never be recorded. And that creates a strange kind of legacy, because the less visible she was, the more important her presence actually became. And if you trace the moments where history could have gone differently, you start to see her there, not loudly, not publicly, just present, where she needed to be. This has been Haunted Wavelength. Tonight's broadcast is over, but not the shadows that haunt the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, or follow so you don't miss what awaits in the dark. Until next time, take care and listen closely. You never know what you might hear next.